The first wedding was supposed to be the only wedding. At least that was the plan. But plans, like cake toppers in the hands of small children, sometimes break. The idea of forever. Georgie and Mandy had been together for 7 years before the idea of marriage came up. Not because they weren't committed, but because they didn't think they needed it. They had built a life together, weekend coffee rituals, road trips where Mandy always drove and Georgie always picked the music, and a collection of inside jokes that could fill an entire book. But one evening, over a slightly burnt lasagna, Georgie's fault, and too much red wine, also Georgie's fault, Mandy blurted it out. "I think we should get married." Georgie, who had just taken a sip of wine, choked. "You think we should get married?" Georgie repeated, once breathing was under control. Mandy shrugged, too casual, too nonchalant for what was undoubtedly a momentous declaration. "Yeah, I mean, we already act married. We finish each other's sentences. We argue about TV shows. We've done the in sickness and in health thing. Remember that time you had food poisoning for 3 days, and I still stayed in the apartment? That was a real test." Georgie laughed, but then grew quiet. Marriage. It wasn't that Georgie was against it, but there was something about the officialness of it that made everything seem heavier. Mandy noticed. "Hey, you don't have to say yes right now. Just think about it." Georgie thought about it. For 2 weeks, actually. And then one morning, while brushing her teeth, she turned to Mandy and said, through a mouthful of toothpaste, "Okay." Mandy, who had just taken a sip of coffee, choked. The first wedding plan. Once the decision was made, things moved quickly. Georgie had always assumed she'd elope if she ever got married, but Mandy? Mandy wanted a wedding. Not a huge one, but one with flowers and dancing, and the kind of speeches that made people cry. They settled on a small garden wedding. Springtime, flowers everywhere. Nothing too traditional. No one would be given away because they were both already exactly where they wanted to be. They found the perfect venue. A little greenhouse that looked like something out of a fairy tale, surrounded by wildflowers. They wrote their vows in the middle of the night, stealing bits of poetry, song lyrics, and memories. They decided on a cake that was half vanilla, half chocolate because neither would compromise. Everything was set. Until it wasn't. A wedding, almost, unraveled. The morning of the wedding, disaster struck. First, the flowers didn't arrive. Instead of the beautiful blush and ivory arrangements they had ordered, the florist delivered cacti. Dozens of tiny potted cacti. Georgie, in full suit and tie, stared at them. "Mandy, we're getting married in an enchanted greenhouse." Enchanted. What part of that says desert survival to you? Mandy, trying to hold back laughter, shrugged. "On the bright side, no one will steal these centerpieces." Georgie groaned. Then came the dress issue. Mandy's wedding dress, a sleek, minimalist dream, had been altered incorrectly. Instead of floor-length elegance, it was now a mid-calf disaster. The seamstress had somehow mistaken tiny adjustment for an entirely new concept. Mandy looked at herself in the mirror, hands on her hips. "I look like I'm about to dance in a 1950s sock hop." "You look like you're about to win a 1950s sock hop," Georgie corrected, which, honestly, I find very attractive. Despite the chaos, Mandy laughed. And then the final disaster, rain. Not a little drizzle, not a romantic, light spring shower. A full-on, sky-opening, dramatic, cinematic downpour. Guests huddled inside the greenhouse, the outside ceremony impossible now. The aisle, a beautiful stone pathway, was a river. The wildflowers drooped under the weight of the storm. Georgie and Mandy stood together, watching the rain. Georgie sighed. This was supposed to be perfect. Mandy took her hand. It still is. You're here. I'm here. And our guests are currently using tiny cacti as umbrellas, which is kind of incredible. And just like that, the stress melted away. Because this wasn't about a wedding. It was about them. The first wedding. So they got married in a greenhouse full of slightly damp people. They walked down the aisle together, holding hands, guests cheering. Georgie's suit was slightly wrinkled from an earlier attempt to save some wet decorations, and Mandy's dress. Well, let's just say the shorter length made it easier to dance in later. Their efficient, a close friend, made jokes about rain being lucky, and